And hopefully you've thought that out long enough and you can build upon it. It's a living document, so you can edit it as years go by, but you really need to start to have this trails plan so that you can create a historical record of your advocacy. You can say that, hey, back in 2018, we introduced our Trails Master Plan, and that's why we are where we are with our advocacy. That's why we're saying this or saying that about where we want trails and the justification for it. And then that document presents a logical justification for your goals, and later it helps articulate or back up your positions. So let's look at the few components of a successful plan. This is not necessarily an all-inclusive list, but it's a good place to start. And if you can check off all these boxes, you really will have a good plan to work within. So you want to map your trail system with both current and future trails. You want an opportunity for connectors and future improvements. That gives you an ability to kind of build upon that and have a spectrum of experiences so that it's not all DH trails or not all beginner trails, but that it serves the broader community of experience levels. Of course, we want trails that are environmentally sustainable, so that we want to be able to address maybe maintenance needs or moving trails that need to go out of a certain area, a sensitive area, and be adjusted. You want to evaluate it often, and like I said, this is a living document, so you update it as you can. You want to be able to have this trails plan, go to that SWOT, that strength, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. But it also must be realistic and justifiable. So this is not your greatest wish list, and it really doesn't match up with what the land agency can ever, hold. And then I think it's a timeline for build out. You're not going to achieve all this in the first year, but you can start chipping away and saying, these are the logical starting places in the first 5 years, maybe 5 to 10 years, and then 10 to 15 years, whatever that may be. Why does this matter in the advocacy discussions and what Todd just spoke about and what we're going to speak about in the next, for this webinar series, is we have to be able to articulate where we're going and how we're going to get there. We need to have that track record of advocacy so that we can, this is not something that we just pulled out of a hat and one day said, no, we don't want X, Y, or Z to happen here because we want trails. No, we've been saying that we wanted trails there, or this was our vision for many years. The longer that you can say that you've been saying, you've been articulating this vision, the better. And we have to be able to depict how our vision fits it within the landscape and other uses. And then we can demonstrate, that we need to be able to meet demand in our growing communities in a sustainable manner. So with that Trails Master Plan, let's move on to the next slide. The GIS analysis. So what informs that really is a GIS analysis. So we work often with Outdoor Alliance, which, as you can see here, this is an output public-facing, version of California's recreation community and how it fits within the public lands or federal public lands in California. We utilize over here all these different entities to populate the data, both agencies and user-created and other groups. It goes into the database, and then we can start to create output of this and analyze where mountain biking fits in with the landscape, where it fits in with other uses. And in this situation, it was really trying to defend public lands, the value of public lands. Next slide. So, but on an internal side, we as advocates, when we utilize the Outdoor Alliance as a GIS shop and all that data, we're given a bit of an internal view and spreadsheet of a situation. So this example here is, as Todd mentioned, the Colorado Congresswoman DeGette's office and her wilderness proposal that came out a few years ago. It's actually been out for quite some time, but we did an analysis a few years ago when she was reintroducing it. And we noticed, hey, there's some flagged recreation here of where her proposal interfered with mountain biking and climbing and other entities that might be affected if the wilderness were put into place where it was being proposed. Armed with that information, we were able to go to the Congresswoman, who we had good relationships with and already established relationships, and be able to, I think we even shared this database with her, and we were able to resolve every one of these so that her bill was no longer impactful in a negative way to mountain biking. And that's a great solution to be able to have something like this, put it onto maps, and be able to show where it's impacting and where we might propose changes or adjustments to the proposal so that it's no longer impacting negatively on our uses. So the value of GIS. Let's move on to the next slide. So when we've gone through this process, we obviously have a number of options to choose for how we're going to respond to a proposal that we are either informed about or learn of. Obviously, these are not necessarily in order, but they are all options for us, as you can see. It's probably more fun and best to be in a champion position or initiating. And what I mean by initiating is that this is your bill, this is something that you're bringing forward, rather than a reactive role of looking at something. But it's okay to be monitoring something or even ignoring it. If you're monitoring a bill or ignoring it, you're probably not as worried about something negative happening if that bill were to pass. The worst scenario is in the opposition, because really now you're playing defensive and you're trying to prevent something potentially negative happening. And so that's in a weakness position. And so ideally, we want to be able to use our master plan, use relationships and other things, and understand the process to be able to engage in these things in a positive way. But occasionally, you do have to oppose bills, and it's best to have strong relationships for that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about relationships. Next slide. Here's just a list of how to, sample communities that we as mountain bike community want to have good, strong relationships with. If you are trying to have this relationship or develop this relationship when you have an immediate need of a situation that's a threat, you're probably in a weaker position, and your relationship or your communication is going to be somewhat negative. If you can be proactive and have those relationships ongoing for years, then when the need arises, you're going to have a more positive outcome, because you already have a strong relationship that you can leverage and rely upon and call upon. There's a lot of groups within this slide that can show you, different levels of your relationships. I put the congressional offices and the state local elected officials as the largest on this, simply because they are the sort of the end point. And even if you didn't have strong relationships on the sides here, they can help you prevent the worst from happening if you have a strong relationship. But it's always better to be standing alongside with these other groups in agreement with when you go to them and have a specific ask or a request. It will lead to a better solution. Next slide, please. Likewise, not everything that we work on is just with other entities, but oftentimes it's on federal lands. U.S. Forest Service and BLM are common for the mountain bike community. And so what I've done here is put a little document that a little table that shows various levels of the agencies and kind of where the frequency of your relationship based on the level that you're meeting with. State and regional directors and state directors, you're going to meet with less often, but you still want to meet with them on a regular cadence in order to have that understanding of your community and the needs that you have, and kind of give them that broad 30,000 foot level discussion. When you get down to which many of you, the participants on this call, probably have stronger relationships with their local recreation planners, and you're going to meet with them regularly to deal with your master plan and advancing it, but also just various issues that come up that are very detail oriented and specific to a landscape. As you go up in that levels at the state level, you're getting more in a general discussion, but you still want them to know who you are and what you need. And of course, presenting them with your Trails Master Plan. Next slide. So what kind of tools can we use when we are looking to have an effect on the outcomes of various proposals? This is an example that's mostly focused around land designation proposals and land protection proposals. I'm happy to say that the red stars indicate that these are all tools that have been effectively and successfully employed in California on the bills that we'll talk about during this webinar series. But these are tools that kind of get into different levels of how you can go about advocating successfully for your needs and your mission. You can obviously the very first one there is making sure that the land management plan, the forest plan, or the BLM resource and management plan align with your goals through your trails plan and things like that. If that doesn't happen, then every one of these others becomes more difficult to change because it's already in conflict with what your goals are. But once you get into the second and all the rest of this list, they're really about how you would address a land designation proposal. But they can be somewhat modified and applied to a land management planning process as well. Having just basic different designations that are bike friendly, making boundary adjustments, cherry stems, trail corridors for your existing trails, accommodations for future trail development that you've articulated in your master plan, for instance. Maybe some cleanup and clarifications of existing trails or even new trails where boundaries could be just slightly modified and tweaked to work for your goals. And then really deferring some time-based stipulations that buy the mountain bike community time to develop a trail system, but maybe that you are not at that point in your timeline of your trails master plan yet. There are different tools that we have used, and you'll hear more about in next week's discussion that address that. The last one would be maybe grandfathering in existing trails under a designation that maybe doesn't normally allow mountain biking, like wilderness or something like that. And that one hasn't quite been achieved yet, and is one of the hardest ones to utilize. Next slide. I think now we'll pass it back off to Todd to get into our roundtable, building a bigger tent. Todd?
Thanks, Aaron. That's a ton of information, what Aaron went through, and then what I said earlier. And we'll have this, I believe we've recorded this, and what we'll do is we'll also have a bunch of materials for you guys to take a look at as well, sort of offline on our website and all the organization's website. And we're planning on doing a number of these types of things. This is our first one, and I think we got off to a rocky start. I'm driving the boat here, so it's kind of that's pretty scary. If anybody's ever ridden with me, that may not be the best thing, but here we are. So hopefully on your end, it's going a bit smoother than on our end, but we're gonna jump into a roundtable. We have a number of people here on the screen, and we're gonna go through a series of questions, and this is really meant to just kind of open up and chat and talk about, like I said, building a bigger tent. I'm gonna stop my screen share, so we're all gonna be on the screen together and you guys can see us. And then hopefully if that works, there we are. Thank you to everyone. So what I'll do is the first question here is how often do you work with other organizations and why? Instead of picking on someone in particular, I'm just going to ask the panel to sort of raise their hand if they want to answer that question and go, and then we'll sort of go from there. So who's first? How often do you work with other organizations and why?
I can go ahead and start. So
Go ahead, Connor.
the majority of our trail projects on the Central Coast are done in collaboration with other trail user groups. Maybe not 100%, but the majority of them. It's super powerful to kind of get all your ducks in a row with your other trail user groups and then go to a land manager with a kind of as a united front saying, we want this new trail, we want to expand this trail network, or we want to make an adjustment here. And we've sort of taken care of the disagreements among ourselves ahead of time, and we just want to do this project together now.
Yeah, I think following up on that, to speak to what Connor's saying, is that forming a coalition usually derives from a need. So rather than seeing a personal goal, but seeing a need of a community and seeing how multiple nonprofits or government entities can work together, so that you can approach a public service officer and then move to your Forest Service, your district ranger, and then move towards your fundraising. I often think that a lot of nonprofits and individuals have goals or have like their own trails master plan without knowing that of others. It's always helpful to kind of form those and morph those to meet community needs, which usually requires a coalition.
Thanks, Dylan. Anyone else want to take a stab at that? Steve?
Yeah, here on the Angeles National Forest, we're fortunate in that we have a pretty robust volunteer program. And part of that volunteer program is a bi-monthly meeting with the Forest Service management of all the volunteer groups. So within that group, we find ourselves working side by side with the Sierra Club and the Boy Scouts and other entities that are out there doing trail work. And that has allowed us to build relationships with those groups and partnerships where we've been able to collaborate on projects. And further down the road, it's led to us being able to work on legislation together. And I'll talk about that a little later.
Katie, did you want to?
Yeah, of course. Well, first, Outdoor Alliance is a strong partner with all the panelists that are on today. So we just appreciate all your support in California. We talk about partnership and collaboration. Outdoor Alliance is a 10-member organization made up of climbers, paddlers, backcountry skiers, surfers, mountain bikers, a whole host of folks. And where we have really been able to have success is in our power building as a coalition, and not just developing relationships. Not only would it be with a land manager, but with congressional districts. And it is, the power is really with the constituents and talking to elected officials. And that's where I feel like folks like Steve and Dylan have been really successful within their districts, is they can work with the conservation community, other outdoor recreation groups. And that's just, if I would say anything to the participants right now, it's like building that community, especially in California with, we've had a number of events or series of events that have happened just in the last 6 months that we're positioned to really do some great work, especially with the new administration coming in. And I know we'll talk about that more, but the power is definitely in the numbers for sure.
Tom, go ahead.
I'll keep it kind of short, but where we've done well is with relationships and having relationships bear fruit down the road. And I'll talk about it a little bit more when I talk about the Huffman bill. But the reason we were involved in that bill is because of advocacy relationships with hikers, botanists, equestrians, and it came back to us at the beginning when they needed to get people on board with that bill. And we're a small community, so our sort of off-channel relationships with people at BLM or Forest Service or local timber companies, or someone that works with the city you've known for 20 years, all that's how we work, it seems to be. So yeah, we just try and stay involved and talk to people and be cooperative.
Thanks, Tom. And as far as IMBA goes, it's I echo everyone's comments on this and answers to this. I think about in a funny way, but not so much, is expanding your empires, right? And we have a lot of mountain bikers out there, and we are so much stronger together. But we also need help, and sometimes your allies today are adversaries tomorrow, and vice versa, and we all know that. But it really is, it's very hard. So IMBA works, I don't think ever do anything alone. We're always working with someone. Obviously we're very close with Outdoor Alliance, and we're very close with them. We're in a number of other groups on the transportation side with People for Bikes. We work with them all of the time. And oftentimes we'll work with others in the conservation organization, a lot of sportsmen and women organizations as well. And that just amplifies what we're trying to do. Not everyone is going to agree with our positioning on certain bills, but it really does help. And I always say, I'd much rather have friends than enemies moving through. But some of these things are so big these days, whether you're talking about a piece of legislation or a piece of policy that's coming out of the administration of BLM or whatever, e-bikes are a good example, or oil and gas leases, as we worked with a lot on that. It's very, very important to work with other organizations and find those common threads. So yeah, I'm glad to hear everyone and echo that completely. Anybody, any final thoughts on this question before we move on? We have plenty of time. by the way.
One thing I'll add is that relationships are important to develop and to nurture, and I've seen that pay off now that I've been at this for 15 years or longer. In that some of the people that I worked with at LA County in their park planning department 10 years ago are now the heads of the department, and I've got a strong relationship. So as well as developing those relationships and those partnerships, maintaining them over time can be really fruitful.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to briefly add on to that, I mean, it's just like relationship maintenance in any other industry or setting. You need to find ways to hang out with people and communicate with them. Like, if, ideally maybe go for a ride, but go to lunch with people that work at agencies or work with other organizations, maintain those connections and network with them. Super important. COVID has made some of that a little bit more difficult, but there's still ways to do it, and it's not going to last forever.
So this is amazing. The mountain biking community all agrees that it's important to collaborate. Excellent, excellent. I'm going to jump here to the chat. We do have a question from Brad Larkins, and he says he's interested in hearing from the panel on tips and tricks in getting access to trail plans, specifically in Orange County. Anyone want to talk about that? About trail plans, master trail plans?
Well, I know that the Forest Service now is going to be managing their Region 5 forests in units. So the 4 Southern California forests are going to be considered one unit. So the Los Padres, the Angeles, the Cleveland, and the San Bernardino are all going to be sharing resources and sharing trail planning efforts, and all of those things are going to be done together. So things are going to change as far as how they're going to be done going forward. And I don't know yet what that's going to look like. And I think the agency and the employees there that I've spoken to are still figuring that out. That's something that we're working on, and that has come up in the Sustainable Outdoor Recreation Collaborative, which is a new group convened at the regional level as an advisory group for recreation. And that group in itself is another excellent opportunity to build relationships with other organizations that I'm sure will have payback as we further advance the mission of this collaborative group.
Yep. Anyone else on that before we move on? All right. What benefits have you gleaned from partnerships that you've created over the years? How have those benefited you? And I think some people talked about that already, but dig a little bit deeper. What directly have you seen grow out of these things? And if you could give examples, if you have them, to think about it.
Well, I can go on that too. In 2009, we had a wilderness bill introduced by Barbara Boxer, in which we lost a bunch of trails. At that time, I was more interested in doing trail work and being a volunteer than getting into the advocacy side of things. But when we lost access to some trails there, and it kind of kicked me into gear personally as far as staying on top of this. And if we go back to the chart that was displayed previously, we were reactive at that point. We weren't proactive. Subsequently, there was a study done to see whether the Angeles National Forest would be worthy of a national recreation area designation. The study found that it was, and legislation was introduced but didn't go anywhere. So with the legislation going nowhere, Judy Chu, a congresswoman in the San Gabriel Valley, petitioned President Obama to create a national monument. So on a Tuesday, October 8th, 2014, we got notice that on Thursday, Obama was going to be out here to declare a monument. And we had no idea what was in it, no idea what was the implications were or what to expect. So we, at that point, met with Judy Chu, met with the Congress member, met with Nature for All, or previously San Gabriel Mountains Forever, who were the NGO championing this effort, and made sure that we had a seat at the table. So subsequently, we were invited to be on the San Gabriel Mountains Community Collaborative Group. And within that group, we have conservation, we have recreation, we have local government, we have underserved communities, and you can search online and see the membership. But out of that collaborative group, I serve on the steering committee with the deputy of the California Wilderness Coalition. And so I've been able to develop relationships that then I was able to leverage for some of the legislation that's now pending and that we'll be talking about next week. So that's a really, had really brought home to me the importance of these collaborative efforts in not just finding where we have common ground and then working from there as a starting point, rather than being reactive and going back to just following up on things that have already happened.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Steve. Anyone else? I know there's some great examples.
I guess playing onto this, I noticed from the comments here as well in the chat box. I mean, depending on who you are and where you're placed within all of these different groups that we mentioned, the term master trails plan, obviously everyone has their own master trails plan. So when you talk about state parks and then you're talking about a county and a city, your city and county master trail plans are probably done by the city and county steering committees, which are public access. Anyone can email them and request to be on that steering committee or listen to kind of what's ongoing. That's going to be funded with city money. And so presenting them your ideas or your local advocacy group's ideas on their master trail plan, that's how you begin to start to coalesce master trail plans. And then you actually get what would be a master trails plan. So I guess it's important that, you know, you're building your own kind of ideas for a landscape and for trails within that landscape. But as we're talking about partnerships and kind of wearing so many hats, melding your visions with the trail visions and just general community visions of others is really where you start to glean those benefits. Example wise, you know, if I'm looking at trails, I'm usually looking at public land. I'm looking at BLM or Forest Service. But even, you know, in the last year or so, I've had large land trusts that happen to have a trails master plan of their own. And we've been able to come together, and while they can open up, you know, 6,000 to 8,000 acres of land to the public right near a pretty large population, we've been able to bring trail experience and expertise alongside their preservation and conservation expertise and glean the biggest benefit for a community at large. So I'd say, like, having your own plan and finding everyone else who has their own plan and building those relationships in relationship to bringing all that together is really key. So if you are looking, let's just say Orange County, you know, you can be emailing your county public servants. You can be emailing the district ranger. You can find the master plans that other people have going.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Dylan. Katie, Connor, Tom, go ahead.
Okay. You know, goes back to relationships again. The earlier in the process you can provide your input, in my experience, whether it's for us, it's County of Humboldt, Bureau of Land Management, City of Arcata, when they have something going on, if you have these relationships that you've had for years and years, they tell you when it's coming up. And they, you know, we've been lucky enough that Bureau of Land Management, County of Humboldt have come to us at the very beginning of their trails plan and said, okay, what do you guys want from this? And will you help us map this stuff out? So it's relationships again and getting in early in the process. We haven't had so much success coming in later in the process.
Right. Katie?
Yeah, I always kind of go back to, I think, you know, Steve's story is like the Shangri-La of, like, he was just a fired up mountain biker that wanted to look for opportunities to get involved. And I think, you know, so often we think that some of these folks are out of reach, whether it's land managers, your district ranger, or elected official staffers. And I think, you know, all of the panelists here have done years and years of organizing, mobilizing, and being there so that when there is an opportunity to strike, whether it's, you know, in the San Gabriels or the Northwest Forest, that those relationships have been cultivated over the years, and you're a trusted resource. So for the people on the call, like, you have this ability, you have this power, you know, with your local mountain bike group or just your friends within your community. And I just kind of want to, like, you know, it is relationships, and that, you know, these are kind of key things that we've learned, you know, as far as communication, collaboration, and then I think the biggest part is the follow-up. You know, the thing is just being there and being a trusted resource. So we keep seeing relationships, and you don't have to work for IMBA or be a policy wonk or whatever. You can just be a really passionate constituent. And ever, like now more so than ever, you know, outdoor recreation, climate change is on the agenda, and it's on top of mind as far as policies. So like if you were on the fence about, hey, should I get involved or not, now's the time, because I think we're going to have opportunities, especially in the state of California.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Go ahead, Connor.
And maybe one other thing I just add on top of all those great comments from the other panelists is just keep an eye on job openings in your area inside of land managers or land trusts. Like for example, one of my best friends that I grew up riding with is now a local ranger who's kind of in charge. He's kind of the point person for trails in an open space with about 50 miles of trails. So now we have a great mountain biker and a great trail builder, and he's also great at everything else in his job too. But it's great to have him, now kind of in charge of building and planning trails for one of our most important open spaces. So keep an eye on those trails coordinator, recreation planner jobs, like city or county or higher levels. And maybe you can, and especially if you also have connections with like your local university, those are great tracks to try to get mountain bikers or outdoor recreation or science majors tracked into, because then they're going to be your future advocates on the inside.
All right, thanks, Connor. And I would think about asking everyone to really think about broadening the term partnership, right? We always think of other organizations, maybe that we're on the other side of the table from, or others, but think about elected officials as well that you may have not worked with. Obviously, we've brought up land managers. Those are a key partner in what we do. And just sort of anything that we've sort of labeled them key decision makers, right? And that's like sort of the biggest universe. Key decision makers are really everyone and anyone that has any decision-making authority and or any influence over the land managers, right? Or land management, period. Where trails can go in, what designations happen. So your partners can, don't limit yourself on the definition of partners. It can be anyone and everyone who has any sort of say in what goes on. So, and that's helpful. All right. Again, we're about 15 minutes away from a Q&A. So we still have some time. I've got a couple more questions for y'all. This is the sort of the converse of what we just talked about, or the first two questions of developing partnerships. Have you ever experienced a breakdown in partnerships? And in your opinion, what caused that to happen? So you were working well with someone, something happened, it kind of fell apart. How do you come back from that? How do you get to that point? It's kind of a tough one. Who wants to be put on the spot?
I'll bite.
There you go.
In early 2000s, Bigfoot Bicycle Club, which is the predecessor of Redwood Coast Mountain Bike Association, we had a partnership agreement with Six Rivers National Forest. And as part of that agreement, we mapped all the trails in the forest, pretty much explored every trail in the forest, and came back to them with a report on which ones had the potential to be mountain bike trails. And there was a lot of talk, and it was exciting. In the end, it turned out that as we started with, that morphed into kind of another trails group, trying to get some trails built in a place called Horse Mountain. It became apparent that the forest had zero desire to actually implement anything. A lot of sort of passive resistance against making things happen. And to me, it's the common thread of every successful project we've had with, especially governmental organizations, is someone inside that organization that wanted the project to happen. And that just was not there. And that partnership has just sort of slipped by the wayside. We haven't lost track of them because there's so much land around us that they manage, but kind of waiting for another opportunity and for them to show some desire, maybe.
All right, thanks, Tom. It's a tough question. Anybody else? Steve?
Yeah, we had, I would call a breakdown in relationship with a local state parks employee who happens to be in charge of volunteer work. And he turned out to be a professed mountain biker and actually admitted so in public to a friend of mine who's a mountain biker who he didn't know at the time was a mountain biker. And that explained a lot because he had been stonewalling us and putting up barriers to us doing the work that we wanted to get out and do, which is to help them. But he let his personal prejudice influence his work, and that affected our ability to get out there. So that's, again, a relationship that comes down to an individual, and that's one individual within a whole organization who was able to have that impact on us. So, be careful about how agency employees' motivations may be driven, is what I would say, and whether their personal biases are coming into that.
Well, since I like you so much, Steve, how did you get over that? How did you work through that?
We haven't. So what we do is we partner with another organization who is an equestrian group to do trail work with them on the same trails we'd be working by ourselves anyway.
So you did get over it, actually. So
we
you
got
worked around it. Yeah. So I mean, and that's where that's going back to the earlier part where the partnerships are crucially and really, really important, right? So
and that partnership is with an equestrian and hiking group. So
exactly. So you're accomplishing what you set out to do. You're accomplishing your goals. It's just not as straightforward as you had hoped, essentially. If I can put words into your mouth. Okay. Anybody else? That's a great example. Thanks, Steve. Anybody else? Got to be good examples out there.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I guess coming from a different angle here, like private industry, working up in the Sierra Nevada, significant amount working with Sierra Pacific Industries, the main logging company up there. They own a pretty significant portion of forests and lands in California. They're not huge fans of allowing recreational access easements. Mainly, I mean, the price of lumber shifts and getting permanent trails allocated on their land can be difficult. There are major success stories, Bellingham being a big one of what can become with logging land. But eventually, if they have plans to log a major corridor, saving some trails can be seemingly impossible. And that relationship I've had break down multiple times with them shutting down potential trail corridors. But at the end of the day, working with the district ranger for Tahoe National Forest and showing major community support. So building large coalitions with the Sierra Club, with backcountry users, with equestrians and mountain bikers has convinced the federal government to purchase the land or purchase the leases back from Sierra Pacific Industry or do land trades. And that's opened up some pretty significant portions. So again, it's kind of a workaround where you have a partner who just tears down negotiations with their lawyers, and you end up turning all the voices of the public towards the Forest Service or towards a larger entity, and you can get around those next plans.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dylan. Connor or Katie, you can skip. I'm not putting you on the thing. You can.
That's all right. Sometimes you may have to wait. As Tom was talking about, and I think when that is the right move, you just have to be ready with your plans and your proposed actions, and make sure your club's capacity is strong, so that when things change, you're ready to take action and take advantage of that, and you're not going to take years to build back up.
And I would just say it's that nurturing those relationships, because you don't know, people move, people get promoted, people get elected, and it's just about continually nurturing those relationships, having those meetings again. So when the time can strike, you know, you have those opportunities. Believe me, I live in a very vast public lands area, and I still had, you know, not the huge conservationist that I had hoped he would be and public lands advocate, but I have those relationships and just want to continue to build. And so when there are those opportunities, so.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Absolutely. And I will say this, for all of us, and I think all of us on this call, mountain biking is personal, and we are incredibly lucky to, perhaps, to work also within this frame. So oftentimes when we find perhaps an adversary or a relationship gets difficult, it becomes personal for us. And I would challenge everyone to take that step back and say it's not personal. Oftentimes when we're working on legislation or issues from a national perspective, and a group that we've been great working with and on other issues says, no, we want this boundary here or whatever it may be, I really try to say, okay, well, that's what you're advocating for, and that's what your organization advocates for, and this is what we advocate for, right? And so don't bring those personal feelings into it and just, you know, try to find that solution, because oftentimes that's what happens. It's this personal feelings, and that just really, you know, sours the relationship. And if you can set that aside, because it happens to all of us, we're so passionate about what we do, and we're so passionate about the sport that we truly love, because we all spend a lot of money on it. So that leads us into the last question. We have about 5 or so minutes. And I think I know the answer to this. You know, someone told me never ask a question you don't know the answer to. Can an adversary become an ally? We can do one-word answers here too, if you want to.
I'd go back to the example that I gave with the San Gabriel Mountains Community Collaborative. You know, I would have considered the Wilderness Society and Sierra Club adversaries in 2009 because they were fighting against us. And once we got on the collaborative together, then that enabled us to explore our commonalities and our mutual interests. And that is what led to us being able to work together on the wilderness legislation that's we'll talk next week about.
Yeah.
But it comes down to communication. As the more time you communicate and find the common ground, the easier it is to work on the stuff that you don't agree on.
Correct. Connor?
Yeah, I think, you know, where I live, it's over the last, 20 years, what you might say the conservation and environmental community has become a lot more closely aligned. And, we have a much closer partnership between recreation groups like our mountain bike org or, others, equestrian groups, and then the conservation or environmental community. And I think part of that is just sort of the realization of how popular and how important new trails were to everyone in the community. And it wasn't a zero-sum game of like more trails are gonna, destroy the environment or gonna negatively impact all of our wildlife, but that we can build and create sustainable trail networks that the community really enjoys, and it really actually gets people more excited about trying to conserve more land. So that's really helped kind of get past like a 90s era kind of divide between recreation and like pure conservation, at least around here.
Katie?
And right now, let's not forget we're still in a pandemic. And I think one of the things that we've seen is that our outdoors have been more popular than ever. And so here we've been able to really align with new user groups and maybe people that we had differences in the past for that common goal and stewardship of, protecting the environment or access to trails and opportunities in the outdoors. And so again, still in a pandemic, a lot of things going on, but I think, folks that I maybe disagreed with 2 years ago, I'm more aligned with than I've ever have been, just with the current state of what's going on right now.
Go ahead, Tom.
I think for us, it's been useful to serve in various committees and such that are not mountain bike related, like Forest Service Resource Advisory Committee or some informal trails group that combined, you know, equestrians and botanists and things like that. Just that we get to know them, and they realize over time that our interests are more closely aligned than they thought. I think that's really important, which is somehow there's this perception, the 90s era perception still, that mountain bikers are these intimidating creatures, and we're conservationists and biologists and fisheries people, and we're just, you know, we're just outdoor enthusiasts.
Yeah, agreed. I think there's a lot of walls to be broken down amongst other groups and how they envision mountain bikers, how they see us, and there's a lot of bridges to be built as well. So kind of two analogies there. That's perfect. I'm gonna. There's a question that someone asked. What is the biggest challenge you have run into when trying to form partnerships? And I'm gonna ask that question in this group because it's related to what we're talking about. So what is the biggest challenge you have run into when trying to form partnerships? And maybe it's all of the answers that we just sort of hit on, but thoughts on that?
I think something that's really helpful is that the 5% or so of bad behaving mountain bikers do not represent the entire community, and getting the people we're trying to work with to understand that there's going to be bad users in every user group who cause the bulk of the problems are not representative. And once they understood that and realized that we don't like the people who are flaunting the rules and making it harder, just like they don't. So that's a commonality that we needed to explore.
Yeah, there is no question there are bad actors in every community, and I try to tell people the same thing. It's like, listen, you know, we're all trying to do the best we can, and to be responsible. If you look at a lot of our policies, they're the same way. And as a rider, I take it upon, you know, myself to be responsible. But of course, there's bad actors, and we don't want them painting the entire picture for the mountain biking community or the outdoor recreation community. So.
I was going to say that I think one of the biggest challenges when forming partnerships is if the other partner doesn't feel like you have anything to offer to them. So, or you don't possess the ability to help them meet any goals that they think are important, then they may just not be interested in engaging with you. So one of the big things we do, and I think probably the same for all these other organizations here, is we do trail work and we build and maintain trail systems. And we do it at a scale that's, no one else does it in our county at our scale. So all the land managers know we're kind of the people that are going to go get something done, take care of trails, build new trails if they want to get new trails built. And that's, bought us tons of credibility. But, if there are, a couple instances locally where there's a land manager that really maybe is not that interested in trails, and they're very happy with the status quo, and they don't want anything to change or be different, it can be hard to get an in. So at that point, it's helpful to try to find people within the organization, start nurturing relationships, and for the long run, and see what kind of change can happen in the long run.
All right, anybody else before we turn into the Q&A for the whole entire group? All right, I'm going to pass the baton to Eleanor for a few questions that we may have for the entire group, which includes Aaron, Mike, and Dave back into the mix.
Great, thank you, Todd, and thanks everyone for joining us. As a reminder, you have a Q&A function. Should be at the bottom of your screen, depending on what device you're on with Zoom. I've also gotten some questions come through the chat, so I'm going to start with those just so I don't forget about them, and then we'll move on to the Q&A portion, those questions in the platform. Our first question is from Susie Murphy in San Diego with the San Diego Mountain Biking Association, probably familiar to many of you on the call. Thanks for joining us, Susie. And Susie asked, have others had improved outcomes over the long term with making sure formal MOUs are in place with various agencies or jurisdictions? they're putting a lot of energy into that in San Diego. Anybody want to jump in? Steve, I have a feeling you may have something to say about this one.
I can jump in too.
For sure.
Right.
Thanks, Connor.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a couple. They've mostly been helpful for us in like getting a project approved that would not otherwise be approved, where a land manager is nervous about it, and like they really want to make sure and like get this in writing, like you guys are going to take care of this, right? A trail or a bike park or something. And so an MOU can be helpful in kind of getting over that hurdle and really stepping up to the plate. Just always make sure that you can actually do your end of the MOU. It's very important.
Eleanor, I might add that, you know, an MOU with an agency can be as meaningless or worthless as the paper it's written on, but it can also serve to create some responsibility between the two entities to communicate. It can be a framework for regular communication by laying out that we will communicate regularly, we will share information as it becomes available, and to that like, so that you have a process and sort of an agreement on paper that you are going to talk about these issues beforehand, and create some process or steps to take to resolve conflicts outside of the public realm, but in an internal format. And that's where I find for organizations, MOUs are the most helpful. Beyond what Connor mentioned, which is very specific to like a project.
And I have an example in the contrary. I also serve on the board of the California Trail Users Coalition, which is a motorized group. And we have had an agreement with the Forest Service to manage one of their retired fire stations for about 20 years. And that 20-year volunteer agreement was, you know, basically a handshake agreement. Now that all the staff who were involved in setting up that agreement are gone, there's been a complete staff turnover. Now we're having a lot of trouble reestablishing that agreement because there's no history with the current staff and there's no continuity. So having an MOU 20 years ago would have set us up to avoid this situation that we're in now with running the North Fork Station for the Forest Service. And it's ending up that instead of having an MOU, we're going to have 3 or 4 separate agreements to cover various aspects of what we do at the station. So yeah, having a MOU not only is important to encourage and require communication, it's also important to have that continuity as you have staff turnover.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Another question for kind of Southern California, and I think this is something that I'm sure touches on a lot of communities in California and elsewhere, is the number of trail users skyrocketing in recent years, and the increase in illegal trail building. And the question from Stacy is, the illegal trail building has created a more adversarial relationship between the mountain bike community and parks authorities. Local clubs are trying to communicate and combat the problem, but it will be a monumental task to change minds on both sides. Any advice for trying to change minds and partner there?
I guess this goes back to whether the county has a trail master plan that is yet to be implemented and whether there are new trails in that. We've seen the same in our area too. There's been an increase in illegal trail building during COVID and a bigger demand for those trails under COVID. But getting the agencies to move on these types of things is like trying to get a glacier to go faster, and it's difficult to get them to act in the short term when we see these things. But how those illegal trail building activities are framed within the conversation can be helpful or hurtful. If we use them as evidence of the demonstrated need for more trails, you know, that's something that's worked in our favor. We had a situation out in the Conejo Valley where people were building illegal jumps on trails, and we used that as justification to get an MOU with the agency to build a bike park, and that bike park is up and running now. So those, how you frame the illegal work in conversations as being indicative of the need for more can be helpful in moving the needle, but you still have to have an agency that's willing and nimble enough to move forward. I'm hoping with the passage of the Land and Water Conservation Fund that there'll be more opportunities to do more planning and more trail building in these types of situations, but I don't know of any secrets to get it to happen any faster.
Great. Thanks, Steve. I want to pick up on that, the idea of more trails, right? I think we're all grateful for the trails we have, and with the new funding opportunities, there's an opportunity for much more in everybody's backyard. That leads into a question we have from Andrew. How long does it take to build a strong, vibrant, and impactful mountain bike organization, particularly when there isn't an urgency at hand, when you have trails already, you know, a scenario of not losing trails but gaining trails. So with the average mountain biker thinking they have what they need, why should they join a club? Go for it, Dylan.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess this is a burgeoning issue in cycling especially. But as a community, as we start to kind of transcend from advocacy alone to activism, you do really need to have all those constituents. And I think if one thing is obvious here, I mean, we're one of the few user groups who can have volunteer days and reliably have a good number of people show up. Them showing up shows they care for the land, they care for the issues at hand, they care for their access. And so there doesn't need to be much at stake with regards to trails to get people to join. You know, showing community voice, whether that's regards to conservation and climate change, or if it's regards to diversifying your group, getting more people in your community involved. I think you have a lot of other issues that you can present to potential people to join a club, and having those issues front of mind is probably what's going to make your organization impactful or make a difference, because you gain expertise by digging into these and making changes in these objectives. So I wouldn't say that trails are the only kind of impetus you need to start a club or to get people to sign on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Eleanor, I would just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, take it, Aaron.
I just wanted to add that, you know, I think I mentioned it in the answers in the chat as well. You know, Trails Master Plan can be a great initiator for getting that discussion going, because you can start to look into the future and say, what is our vision for this community? Is it where we are now? And in some situations, I've seen organizations, even in Crested Butte, say, we have the trails we want. Let's create a Trails Master Plan that talks about the maintenance of those trails to make sure that they are great. And that can be the facilitator for creating an organization that focuses more on stewardship than on advocacy. And, you know, things evolve over time.
Yeah, and I just want to add, this would be, if our board member, Ernie Rodriguez, who's the president of the Mid-Atlantic Off-Road, basically the Washington, D.C. area club we're on, he would say that creating community is really important. And remember, you can create a very powerful, influential, robust club with a groundswell of support. And not all that support is going to be about wielding tools and getting involved in planning. A lot of people it's just not their thing. But they love the events and the community, the annual get-togethers, and then you'll be able to go to the county commissioners or the powers that be with a much larger, more influential group. So I know Ernie would say community, community, community.
And I
was
would
thinking the
just
same
follow up
thing.
on that. It's economy, right? Like trails can build economies and communities. And we have some great examples here in California where we're connecting trails that connecting to rural communities that no longer have extraction, where gay jobs have gone away, and outdoor recreation, mountain bike trails are bringing the community and economy back to some of these areas.
If I were advising a group of people that wanted to develop a mountain bike organization today, I would tell them, look beyond mountain biking, make it a trails organization. go build a bigger tent like we talked about in this, is have other trail users part of this so that you have a bigger voice.
And it's not always more trails too. It's about building community. Maybe there's an unmet need in our community. The unmet need was sanctioned expert level trails. And we were able to form a partnership with the timber company. It changed our club. It changed our power within the community to work on other types of trails too. We built a reputation. We established ourselves as a group that can get things done via this, expert level trail system. It's been a game changer for us. And it was looking to fill an unmet need.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that. I saw that Joseph Flores put in a chat about a homeless presence in Bakersfield, California along the trails. And I thought that, this can also be part of that, as you build an organization and you change a dynamic of an area, it can transform a place. I think there's examples in Seattle, in the middle of Seattle, Washington, where they built a trail system underneath a bridge, an overpass that transformed that area to become, cleaned up and maintained. I don't know if it still is, but that story was, a big story a number of years back.
Okay. Moving into some of the questions we have in the Q&A, I'd love to answer, let's see, Brian's question first, because I think it tees into this well. Well, have us all take a little bit of a step back. For somebody who is newer to this, Brian's the coach of the Wood Creek High School mountain bike team in NorCal. How can those community members partner with folks like yourselves and get more involved? What are the steps they can take to work more closely with you on trails? Connor, do you want to get started on this one?
Yeah, sure. So, one thing that comes to mind is, well, first off, one great thing that's been challenging in the last 6 months or so is that we haven't had some of the events in California, the in-person events that can tie together clubs and groups, like Sea Otter or Trails and Greenways Conference. When those are happening again in person, and those are great to try to attend or send someone from your local club or team to attend. We're also at 3CMB where I try to talk with like the clubs that are near me, like Dylan down in Santa Barbara and the folks up in Santa Cruz and that kind of a thing. So maybe just talk on the phone every now and then with the people in your region, and or try to go for a ride with them or go get lunch with them or something. I'm also talking with Mike at California Mountain Bike Coalition. I think the hope is that group will continue to be and be even to a greater degree a way to facilitate communication among the different organizations in California, try to communicate about what are the biggest, like maybe some like regional level projects that are really important to us, a new place to race or a big trail network, or a really significantly impactful trail like the Demo Flow Trail in Santa Cruz Mountains. Yeah, let's get in touch and we can talk.
I'll add to that as well. Brian, just in terms of the NorCal League actually is part of CAMTB now, and we have an advisory council that we convene on a regular basis that really helps us identify opportunities for projects for us to team up and partner on. So I'd encourage you to, within the leadership of that organization, to sort of express your opinions and share what's a highest priority to you, and encourage them to bring that to that forum. I think that's going to be a really valuable platform for us to help prioritize our focus and help get resources and identify projects for us to work on together.
And I would just add, if there are youth that want to get more involved in advocacy, I've seen legislators just, give the mic to young folks and outdoor recreationists, and that really helps move the needle. And them hearing from constituents, especially young advocates, is a huge positive, and can help move some legislation and be influential. So please feel free to reach out to me as well.
I just would like to reiterate that having youth involved is powerful. A shout out to our Humboldt Composite Mountain Bike League. Those kids have been amazing, and their presence is seen and noted. Having 40 kids show up for a practice in the Arcadia Community Forest is a powerful move.
And look at the trail maintenance opportunities too. Vernon put it in the chat there about the Teen Trail Corps. Very powerful in California, and we're working hard to partner with NICA to grow that program statewide. And so absolutely getting the young people love to do the trail work for the most part. It really gives them a bond to the trail. So anytime that we can involve them in that part of it is very powerful.
Right. I think we probably have time for one or two more questions here before we wrap it up. I'm going to take Pat's question because I think it dovetails back into the panel discussion very well. What entities or organizations do you see going forward that will be the major forces preventing the development of new trails or expansion of existing trails in California? And what are likely to be the most effective approaches to overcoming that opposition? Katie, do you want to start with this one? I think you've got the broadest scope for the state.
Well, I think I think some of these folks can get into a little more regional, but I would say, and Todd and I spoke about this yesterday from a national level. We've been Outdoor Alliance pretty active in, doing defense on energy dominance. And one of the great examples is down in Moab, where we were able to mobilize folks and stop the release of almost 85,000 acres of extraction leases in one of the most iconic mountain biking areas in the country. And so I would say from a national level, and from what I do, is these outside groups, extraction groups coming in, what will be in opposition of us, building trails and, doing the great work that we do.
Yeah, and I think we did it twice. We did it in February of this year, then we did it again. And talking about partnerships, actually the motorized community was also within that, where it's the Jeep riders in Moab and all that. From a national perspective, we're always going to have people who don't want to see mountain bikes in certain natural areas. It's just sort of what happens. And it's always difficult, and those conversations really never amount to anything and never really go anywhere. And that's why building partnerships, Steve had a great example of building it with the equestrians. But to give you a little insight of what we're thinking from a national level on the Moab specific stuff, we want to see this new administration really have a higher value for recreation than some other uses on public lands. In California, I don't know. In California, it's sort of a different, obviously different landscape and a different set of circumstances there. But from a national perspective, there are certain areas with energy exploration that just aren't very valuable, yet they're still on the books of a priority use, if you will. We want to flip that. We want to say, no. Outdoor recreation should have the priority here, and we should permanently remove a lot of these unnecessary mineral leases and push towards that. So that sort of gets to that point. But yeah, I mean, even within the conservation community, you are going to have those sort of extreme organizations that just don't want to see mountain bikes anywhere, and that's difficult. We've reached out, and we've always are willing to build bridges. We're always willing to talk with these folks, but it can have a difficult run, but there's always a way. So I'll stop there.
Well, I want to add. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, in that, the Sierra Club nationally has one policy for mountain bikes, but the local chapters don't necessarily adhere to that policy in the same way. But as far as entities that may be forces preventing the development of new trails, I think that comes more down to agency apathy and budgets and staff and personnel at the agencies. I don't see the conservation community fighting new trails very often as much as I see the apathy or the inability of the land managers to move forward on those opportunities due to their limited resources.
I was going to say, I think that the population is growing, and recreation of all types has impacts. We have to, as mountain bikers, acknowledge that and then proactively start working with the wildlife agencies, because I think when you're talking about impacts, we've, for the most part, been able to mitigate impacts from a resource standpoint, but when it comes to wildlife, overpopulation, growth of users on the trails, certainly during this pandemic, we've seen more of it, is that there are impacts to wildlife. And I think that my view, at least here in Colorado, as one of the largest entities that has influence over whether or not we will be successful at having trails connected, refined, or expanded, is that wildlife community. And therefore, we are working proactively to increase and strengthen our relationship with the wildlife community, even working on documents that are pathways of recreation and conservation together, because we all recognize that those impacts are there. And if we try to hide that or ignore that or deny it, that will just lead to a black eye. So I really would answer that with the wildlife community, wildlife agencies, because they are going to be the ones that can close the door on trail access, and working with them will be a successful way forward.
Yeah, I mean, circling this back around kind of where it began, I mean, you can look at individual entities that are maybe causing problems with small projects or even bigger bills here and there. But if you look at a bigger issue, the amount of trails lost in recent years, I think you'd be looking really at climate and extractive industries. Like, look at forest fires in California and Colorado these past few years and tell me that we haven't lost more trails to wildfires than through any other bill or otherwise. So, I mean, stepping up, as long as we're fighting conservation groups here, extractive industries are laughing all the way to the bank. We're distracted. So we're with people like Outdoor Alliance or Protect Our Winters with our community here. That's how you really make change. Carrizo Plain, I can say even locally, working against extractive industries there has opened up new trail opportunities for communities that don't have them. So really, like, to pick a specific entity, I would really pick climate for you. It's an issue that's a lot sooner and a lot more immediate than people give credit to.
Oh, thank you, Dylan. Thanks, everyone. Just to end it on a positive note, because I think this is almost the antithesis of the same question, Richard did ask about urban and suburban area trail development and opportunities for multi-user cooperation. So I'm curious if any of you have examples of more urban trails that you've worked on with your local club, and maybe some of the unique partnerships you've found there, or the newer partnerships you've explored.
So here in Los Angeles, equity of access to trails is a big issue, and the LA County did a study, the park needs assessment, where they went county tract by county tract around LA County and figured out how many acres of park space, how many trails people have access to, and those park needs assessments came out with a result that indicated where these trails need to be, and provides a framework for creating new opportunities where there is the greatest need. And the fortunate thing about this is that LA County is fully multi-use, and all of their trails are multi-use. So I think an effort like that by the county to determine where the needs are is really helpful in getting those opportunities up off the ground.
Well, I'm going to take this hat off and I'm going to put this hat on. This is my Moore hat, and Dave mentioned Ernie before. This is my local club. And we are working to develop an area called Fort DuPont, which is right in DC. It's in Anacostia. And it's a National Park Service unit. And they have a hiker-biker trail there. And it's got enormous potential to be an incredible urban mountain bike trail. The problem is the Park Service is really not interested. And this goes back probably a decade now, where the Mid-Atlantic off-road enthusiasts have been trying to work with various superintendents, and there's an optics problem, and we've realized that, where it's usually a bunch of middle-aged white men coming in and begging to develop a mountain bike trail so we can ride our $6,000-$7,000 bikes, and the neighborhood around it does not reflect that, and they're just like, no, we're not going to do that. So in some ways, we've struggled with this, and it's been on the back burner a lot. Then amazingly, because of the pandemic, one of the DC rec directors reached out to myself and Ernie saying, hey, do you guys know about this Fort DuPont and this great trail that's over there? I want to get all of these kids riding that trail. And we're like, oh, thank God, and so we started working with them. We're working on getting the kids bikes. They do a Saturday morning ride every week now. They're doing a ride over there until we get a little colder here. It's beautiful, actually, right now, this time of year. And we're getting some traction, and we hope what that happens is then the Park Service says, okay, we need to do something with this trail. Much like there was another question about homeless encampments, we go through the same thing at Fort DuPont. I remember that one of the first times I rode there many years ago, I rode over about 30 used needles. And so we'll go in there as a club and we'll do tons of cleanup. There, a lot of it, tires, a lot of just garbage, but it's such a gem right in the middle of our city that we're just refusing to let it go to waste. So, talking about a number of different voices and a number of different groups wanting to get in here and do this, and it just doesn't benefit us. This is what we're talking to the Park Service about. You've got dog walkers, you've got trail runners, you've got naturalists, bird watchers, all of that will benefit by what we do. Go in and build a sustainable trail, maintain it, keep it clean. And there's also a safety issue, right? So everyone's like, I don't want to go there, we're dark, it's too early. And you get more people using this trail, that doesn't become an issue any longer, or a perceived issue perhaps. So I can talk directly to that because I'm living that dream for many years now. So
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, and I think that that gets back to talking about it's more than just the trails, right? It's about community, and that's right. That's what a lot of what we do, building community and building up our community locally. Well, we're just a little bit over time. Thank you everyone for the questions. I know we have a few left in the Q&A. Joe, Jake, Tony, I'll get back to you separately. We'll get you answers. But I just want to turn it over to Dave to wrap things up.
Thanks, Eleanor. And yeah, just to put a bow on that last comment and to piggyback on what Tom said earlier, the kids could be one of our tickets to getting more things done as more and more kids are riding mountain bikes. Thank you all for participating. Many thanks to our panel. Thanks again to Patagonia. Join us at the same time next week for part 2 of the series, where we're going to discuss 4 active bills in California, where the strategies that we've talked about today have been put to use. We're also going to cover the dynamics of the next Congress and what we can expect lies ahead for mountain biking. So thanks again, and I hope to see everybody next week.